Completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and it's the day after the election. Looks like we all survived just fine, but interesting fallout as you might expect. It seems like every election becomes just a little bit sharper of a power struggle, and the power of the incumbency, at least in the more populous counties in Idaho, specifically in Ada County, I believe in the Meridian mayor's race, it's clear the power was with the incumbency, and to the laments of some of the people on the political right who are like, oh, well, this is it. Boise is lost. Look, it's never lost until you give your consent that this is the way things are going to be. But we've made it through another year, another cycle of the reassurance ritual. And I'm sorry if it sounds like, are you speaking ill of our democracy here? I'm not trying to downplay democracy, but I am going to ask you to consider, is voting really the impactful? Is it the sacrament, the civic sacrament that we're sometimes led to believe that it is? Now, I believe it's a part of good citizenship, and I believe that a person who's wanting to use his or her influence wisely should be an informed voter. However, I think it's probably the lowest hanging fruit and a bit overripe at that in terms of what you can do as a citizen to actually influence, the governance of within your community, within your household, even within your own life. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about what the next big battle is going to be, okay? This election is behind us. Ranked choice voting and open primaries are going to be the question that we'll be facing a year from now in Idaho's general election. Oh, there's going to be a presidential election too. Maybe you've heard something about that. But this is the one that's going to get some attention. And as usual, it's going to be fed to us through the media by the usual suspects, and that is writers whose keyboards look something like this. Yeah, they don't even have to hunt out the specific letters. They can just hit words. Putin, fascist, terrorist, systemic racism, experts say, and the like. What, you think that's a parody to say that such individuals exist? Let's take a look and see. We're going to start with a commentary from Chuck Malloy asking, could ranked choice voting system work in Idaho? Well, it's very likely going to be on the ballot. So I think it's fair of him to examine this. And to his credit, I got to give credit. I'm not poking fun at Chuck at all. He gives it a pretty even-handed treatment. But it's interesting, speaking of, those who would write with the ready-made phrases and the fear-mongering at hand. We start with a comment here from former Idaho Attorney General and Supreme Court Justice Jim Jones, who's written that ranked choice voting may be the only salvation from the extreme politics ruling the state. I guarantee you, Jim's keyboard looks like the one that we saw just a few moments ago with the writer out there to scare the crap out of people. Now, what about other people, though? What do they think about ranked choice voting? I can tell you this, Idaho's Republican Party chairperson, Dorothy Moon, not a fan. Chuck Malloy says that Moon soundly rejects the proposed initiative while blasting some of the voices from the past. She says, make no mistake, this initiative is a pernicious plot to take away your ability to vote for conservative lawmakers. Now, Brent Regan, the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee chairperson, also opposes the initiative. And Chuck kind of pulls the King Solomon, so to speak here, splits the difference. Okay, so here's your quick voter's guide on the issue of ranked choice voting, or the voter initiative. So open primaries and ranked choice voting. If you dislike Moon, Regan, and those from what he calls the far right, well, then you might think the voter initiative is the greatest idea since blue turf on a football field. If you're not a fan of the likes of Otter and Jones, now he kind of soft pedals that, doesn't he? Then you can equate this initiative with poison ivy, something you don't want to touch. Okay, he's doing a great job there of straddling the fence there and coming out. Just look at it. Chuck, you're on all sides of this issue. But it is an issue that's going to matter, and it's one that we really should pay attention to. There is a movement afoot right now to try to consolidate power in the hands primarily of the incumbents or those who represent the establishment, but also to make sure that they freeze out anybody who remotely understands what the proper limits of government are and as an elected official is willing to abide by those limits. In other words, people who are willing to rein in the power of government, to the advantage of the citizenry. Speak of the devil, Senator Brian Lenny. actually shares with us the question here. Who's for open primaries and ranked choice voting? Democrats, leftist groups like Reclaim Idaho. By the way, look at their donations. Look at who gives them money. And oh, no, that's just a run-of-the-mill, mainstream, even kind of conservative group. No, it's not. Definitely not when you follow the money. How about Butch Otter and his liberal Republican pals? That's who's for open primaries and ranked choice voting. Why? Well, Brian says because that's how you get liberals in both parties elected. And that's the death of conservative Idaho. Now, proponents of ranked choice voting and of open primaries are saying, see, they admit it. This is going to be the end of, their ability to hold on to power. But it's not the condemnation that it's not the conservatives who are trying to game the system. Rather. It's the RCV folks and the open primaries folks who think that they've got to game the system to make sure conservatives don't ever get their hands on power. So that means liberals and moderates can hijack our conservative primaries and vote in Republican races. Senator Lenny says, you get it. Imagine letting the other team pick your players. No more true conservatives winning easily. Now, this is assuming you understand how the ranked choice voting works. It's not just simple, I cast my vote, and my vote's what it is. No, you gotta vote for people you don't really want to vote for because you got to be strategic, and it's complex and it's complicated, and you might just be able to game yourself into a candidate who otherwise wouldn't have a voice. Oh, it doesn't make sense? Yeah, to me neither. Ranked choice voting in open primaries might seem fair, says Senator Brian Lenny, but when you look at what it's done to places like Alaska, it's a tool for diluting strong conservative choices, or voices rather. Your second or third choice could end up deciding the race, and that's a slippery slope. In other words, instead of casting your vote, now you got to go play some mental games and, how can we swing this in a way that I want it to go? There's a much simpler way. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. Butch Otter and his liberal Republican pals are on board with this. Senator Lenny says, figures. It's a way to make the GOP more moderate and to water down conservative values. And of course, leftist groups are drooling over this opportunity because open primaries and ranked choice voting can weaken true conservative influence. Blue Idaho, that's their end game. And as Senator Lenny says, they don't even hide it. So that's really what's at stake. And, it's not like, oh, he's just making this up. No, this is the stated goal, but it's being sold as this idea of, but it's just fair and it's letting people's voices be heard. And it's giving the illusion that their voice is being heard, but really it's consolidating power for those who want to game the system. Again, simple way to do it is very easily one person, one vote, show up in person to cast your vote, paper ballot, nothing complicated about that. Senator Lenny says an unlikely alliance is forming, and it's got one aim. That is to tear down conservative Idaho. If you value our traditions and political landscape, he says, now's the time to speak up, reject this idea, and get loud. Oh, I know. Is that a call to violence? Only in the minds of those individuals who, I guess, for whatever reason, think they have something in store for us that might provoke us to feel violent. But Senator Lenny also shared something that I thought was very illustrative of how most politicians, I'm going to say rhinos particularly in Idaho, approach a difficult question here. Here's the quandary. Behind door number 1, you can do conservative things. Behind door number 2, you run as a Democrat. Door number 3, become a corporate interest shill. What would a rhino do? I think we all know pretty well what the rhino would do, right? The rhino would run and kick open door number 3. How do I become a corporate interest shill? Now, that's one of the things I do love about Senator Lenny is he unapologetically kicks open door 1 every time. There are those like him, but isn't it interesting? They're the ones who are being targeted and being told, we need to get rid of these people. It's for the good of the community. It's for the good of everybody else. They're too extreme. What is their extremity? It's telling government no. It's actually drawing a line and saying, what you're trying to do here, that's not appropriate for government to be doing in the first place, or we're spending too much money in this area, or this is wasteful, or that infringes on our freedoms. To people who want power for the purpose of controlling others, that's never going to be, an ethical question for them. Of course, we know what's best for them. We just have to make them do it. All right, let's get back to the discussion here. Saw this today, and I thought it was interesting because this more or less illustrates how we get called extreme and told you guys don't care about anything. George Alexopoulos says art requires empathy. Conservatives lack empathy, or so we're told. Therefore, conservatives cannot produce good art. Now, listen to this analysis. These mental gymnastics presuppose conservatives lack empathy because, and tell me if any of these sound familiar. We don't hate ourselves enough. We don't hate our country. We don't believe history has an edit button. We choose life. We do not cheer for self-mutilation. We condemn sexualization of the innocent. We want to be armed to protect ourselves and our families. We want psychos who loot and burn down our public squares imprisoned. We don't permit medical experts to force experimental injections on us. Only humans make art, you see, and we clearly are not human. Now, chances are, if you have even, brushed up against being conservative in your thinking, you've probably been accused of one or more of these things. Well, why aren't you on board? Why aren't you, was woke like us? It's a fair question, but look, this is where it goes. This is the kind of madness. And all I'm pointing out here is I don't care about these people's lives in terms of, I don't want to go inject myself into their life. I don't want to interfere with their happiness, but ask yourself, why would news media, particularly Daily Mail, online, be promoting a story like this? Author comes out as transgender man after his wife came out as a trans woman, and pair who have a trans daughter now live in a four-way relationship with their trans lovers. Hello? We're supposed to just smile and nod. Yep, that's normal. Totally nothing wrong with that. Yeah, that's just, why, that's any one of us. It's not. That's mainlining of mental illness. And again, I wish no harm. I wish no sorrow for these people, but don't pretend, or don't ask us to pretend that this is just normal and it's, it's the way things are supposed to be. This is why we have to be careful, not only in how we vote, but in the way that we consume information. Let's finish up with a quick note or two about propaganda. You are not immune to propaganda. Now listen to this part. If you don't like something on the internet, that's okay. Just ignore it. Participating in pointless discussion, or pointless online argument rather, only assists in your own subversion. In other words, you get drawn into it and you're arguing whatever this particular issue may be. What's it distracting you from? What's it keeping you from that you could be choosing to give your attention? That's how it assists in your own subversion. It defines what deserves your attention versus what doesn't. Maybe that's a game that's not worth playing. Everything must be seen through the lens of information and psychological warfare. Now, here's what that means. This is not paranoia. This is not all, you were looking for the sunglasses from They Live and, the hidden messages everywhere. It's the idea that there is serious manipulation of public opinion going on around us at any given moment. So, this is the advice. I cannot stress this enough. You don't need to be a sheep to fall for propaganda. None of us are immune to influence or psychological manipulation. There's a reason governments and hackers exploit the same psychological vulnerabilities, because it's effective. And here's a quote from 100 years ago, or nearly 100 years ago, from Edward Bernays, considered the father of modern propaganda. If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will. He's talking about the people in charge, without them knowing it. Okay, this is the guy literally who wrote the book on propaganda. It's a marvelous read, in case you're wondering it. Not all propaganda is necessarily a bad thing, but propaganda that deceives, that leads you to falsely believe something as fact that is not a fact, you can see where that would get you in trouble, or at least could lead a nation or a society astray. Well, it's one of the reasons that I, along with many other people, raise my voice to try to warn people, be skeptical, be careful, be distrustful. The media is not there to inform you. It is not there to tell you the facts and make sure that you have enough information to make an informed judgment. It's there to keep you on a narrative that benefits those who are already in power. Then comes the question of, are they operating in your interest? If the answer is no, then we need to make some choices, don't we? Especially when we head for the ballots next year. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.